in. Well, good evening, everyone. This is our final garden webinar for the spring, and we have saved the best for last. With us tonight is Dr. Donald Lewis. He is our ISU Extension and Outreach Entomologist. He does an amazing job, and we are so excited to have you tonight, Dr. Lewis.
All right, thank you for the opportunity. Am I going to take it away now?
You take it away now.
All right, well, hello and welcome, and glad to be a part of your seminar. Sorry it's the last one of the season, but you know, all good things come to an end. So I'll share my screen with you so that you can follow along on the PowerPoint that I'm going to talk about common garden pests. But I'm really going to limit my comments to just one, the fuzzy Japanese beetle there in the top corner. He didn't expand very well, did he? I'm going to spend a little time talking about Japanese beetle, and then we'll go to this question, what would you like to know about? We'll spend the rest of our time talking about whatever insects or related arthropods are on your mind. And it can be wide open to anything from the garden, from the house, and anywhere else you'd like to talk about it. This won't take very long to get through Japanese beetle, but we will cover that. And then, because the questions are quite common right now, when I'm done with that, I will talk about paper wasps. Why are there so many paper wasps flying around our houses this year? And I'll also touch on the Asian giant hornet, which has been in the news and has been given an unfortunate nickname when it already had a perfectly good name, the Asian giant hornet. So I'll be talking about those two as well. Well, Japanese beetle is a well-known pest, and it's probably something you're familiar with. If you're not already familiar with Japanese beetle, someday you will be. It has been spreading around the United States since 1913. It's been spreading around the state of Iowa since 1994. So it has been getting around. Before we start talking about just the Japanese beetle, though, I do want to make this comparison of two totally different, unrelated beetles that have similar sounding names that have confused people for a long, long time. The Japanese beetle that we're going to talk about is a big insect at about ½ an inch, has these really startling colors of bright metallic green, the coppery brown wing covers, and then those tufts of hair. And the thing about it is the Japanese beetle feeds on foliage, flowers, and fruits. It is a pest. The insect of similar name is the Asian lady beetle. It is a ladybug. All ladybugs are lady beetles. All lady beetles are ladybugs. It feeds on aphids during the summer in the trees, the fields, the gardens, and so forth. And then in the fall of the year, this one has the nasty habit of behaving in a manner similar to box elder bugs. And so it's attracted to the south side of the house in the sunshine, and a few of them wander in. The only thing these two insects have in common is their name. To many Iowans over the years, Asian and Japanese have sounded too much alike. And so in the fall of the year, people will call and they'll ask, how do I get the Japanese beetles off the side of my house? And I say, oh, you mean you have multicolored Asian lady beetles? And they say, yes, that's what I said, Japanese beetle. So this is a bit of a name problem, and there are lots of examples where we get names mixed up, especially common names, or different organisms have the same common name. But this is just one thing to look for as we talk about the Japanese beetle going forward. Well, the Japanese beetle is a double whammy in your landscape and garden, because in the adult stage, they feed on the foliage, flowers, and fruits of 350, some people say 400. It's a whole lot, but hundreds of different species of plants. Then in the late summer, when they have laid their eggs, their offspring are larvae that live underground and feed on the roots of grasses and ornamentals, and can be a turf grass pest called white grub. So it's the same insect above ground and below ground. It just happens to be damaging to landscapes in both stages. Well, when we talk about in the garden, there are some vegetables that are particularly popular with the Japanese beetle. I would have said beans would be at the top of this list, but alphabetically, asparagus comes first. When the beetles appear in July and August, they will feed on the asparagus ferns and can cause some damage that way. Holes in the leaves of beans and eggplant and herbs and okra are certainly noticeable in that second half of the summer as they're feeding. When Japanese beetles are attacking your sweet corn crop, they aren't interested in those tough, brittle leaves. Instead, they feed on those emerging corn silks, which wouldn't be a problem if the plant is already pollinated. But if your sweet corn has not yet pollinated and the Japanese beetles eat the silks away, then you won't get a full ear of kernels from that. So lots of different vegetables can be attacked. All of our fruits can be attacked: apples, peaches, cherries. They can eat the foliage off of all those different plants. And what you see here is typical of the defoliation, where they feed on the green material between the veins, but they leave the veins. So what's left behind is the skeleton of the leaf, which loses moisture and rapidly turns brown. In addition to feeding on the foliage, they will feed on the fruits directly. And raspberries and ripening in the fall of the year is one of their favorites, along with apples and peaches. And often there will be hundreds on the fruit crops that are coming into bear in the fall of the year. Finally, Japanese beetle is a real pest on ornamentals as well. Linden trees seem to be at the top of the list, and that's what you see there on the left, a linden tree that is totally brown from that skeletonized defoliation that took place primarily in August. A little earlier than that in some years it's in July, but I did walk my dog under that tree for years and years, and every spring that tree looked fine. Every fall it looked defoliated, but it never died. And that's a thing to remember about Japanese beetles. They also feed on crab apples, the ornamental variety of the apples that we grow in the orchard. And roses appear to be a favorite. Grapes are also, so as you kind of think about that apple family of plants, there's a whole bunch there that they do feed on. So this is typical of the defoliation that we would see in that July to August and on into early September time. When people are first noticing the Japanese beetle, their reaction tends to be that the sky is falling, that this is the end of the world. Life is not going to be worth living if my linden tree turns brown. They're eating my roses. I just don't feel good about myself because of the amount of damage that's happening. And what we have to remind them sometimes is the Japanese beetle has been in the United States since 1916. It is found all the way to Colorado. Now, west of us, it gets very spotty. There's just a few infestations in the Great Plains between us and the Rocky Mountains. But from us to the Atlantic seaboard, it's pretty general. Now, not everyone in Iowa has it yet, and not everybody in the infested counties has it yet, but it's been here a long time. And they still have roses, they still grow grapes on the eastern side of the United States. So it's not the end of the world to have Japanese beetle, although when you see that huge outbreak for the first time in your own yard, there is this heart attack inducing feeling that, my gosh, life as we know it is no longer going to occur. Well, I mentioned that most of Iowans have seen the Japanese beetle, but it's really only 71 counties where we have documented its existence. It was first found over in Scott County in Davenport back in 1995 and has very slowly moved across the state. Obviously, it didn't move in a wave. It kind of hopscotched and leapfrogged, primarily because it's transported with plants and people. But there's a huge section in Northwest Iowa where no one has reported it. Now, I can't say it's not there. It just hasn't been reported to me. And that's when I fill in the map, is when I hear from someone in that county and they send me a picture documenting that they found it there. So it's probably in more counties than this map represents, but this is what we knew when we finished our surveys and finished compiling our information late last year. So we're all in this together. It's like the COVID-19 virus. It's going to be in lots of places and affect lots of people, but we'll get through it, and we're all in it together. Not everybody sees Japanese beetle at the same time, and that even within those counties where it's been found, it's not uniform throughout the county. It arrives in different yards, it arrives in different landscapes at different times. So everybody, it seems, goes through this invasion curve sooner or later. Some of us were much sooner, some people haven't even started. So there's a time when you didn't have any Japanese beetles in your yard, and those were the fortunate good old days. You just didn't know to call it that. Then a couple Japanese beetles arrived, and the next year, oh, look, now it's 10. Last year it was only 1, this year it's 10. The next year it's 10,000, and the year after that it's 10 million. And there is this exponential growth that happens when the population explodes in an area. After the explosion, there will be periods of variability with great fluctuation. Now, the explosion happened for me back like 2005 to 2010. And since then, it's been up and down. Some years I see a lot, some years I don't see many. So when you're in that exponential growth, and as you're reaching the top, is when you really feel the sky is falling. And after you get past that peak, then there will be this leveling off and this variation from year to year. Japanese beetle has a complete life cycle, like all the beetles. The females lay eggs in sod, not in tilled soil, but in grassy soil. They hatch into tiny little grubs that grow very quickly. They go from a little 1/4-inch grub to an almost 3/4-inch grub in about 4 to 6 weeks. So it's very rapid growth through 3 molts. And that happens over the course of the summer. Now, the Japanese beetles spend the winter down in the soil as larvae, 4 to 6 inches deep, unaffected by the temperatures above ground. But then in about June, they start to form a pupa underground. And often by the end of June, and certainly by the 4th of July, we are seeing our first Japanese beetle adults. They come out of the ground, they begin to fly around, they mate, they begin to look for places to lay their eggs. So from the end of June until the end of August, the Japanese beetles may be present. Now, each Japanese beetle may only live 2 to 4 weeks, but they will be present for 2 months. It's because they come out a few at a time. They don't all emerge out of the ground at exactly the same moment. They come out in a staggered fashion. And that's why we have this extended period of adult activity, which gives us an extended period we have to protect our plants or worry about defoliation, and then they begin to lay eggs. The larvae grow very quickly in August and September, and by October and November, they're moving downward in the soil in preparation for spending the winter, and then we'll come back up the following year. So 1 generation per year, and it takes 1 year to complete a life cycle. So that's why we call the larval stage the annual white grubs. And that's the ones that are common in people's lawns. Well, to jump to the final question, what am I going to do about it? One of your options is to tolerate the damage. If it's a linden tree, if it's a crabapple tree, they can take defoliation. Here's a little statement that should be embroidered on everybody's pillow. Defoliation of deciduous trees does not equal death. All right? The deciduous tree that has turned brown from defoliation is not dead. And so one of our jobs as master gardeners is to tell people in August, put away the chainsaw, your linden tree is alive, it's not dead, it will come back. Sometimes they put on a few green leaves yet that year, but other years they don't. Always on the list of controls is screening and hand picking. If you're going to pick off Japanese beetles by hand, you better have just a few small plants. There's no way we could do it on these large linden trees, on the large crabapple trees. We certainly couldn't do that in an orchard. But in small numbers, on small plants, hand picking might work for you. It certainly has the emotional satisfaction of watching them squirm and die in your little bucket of soapy water where you've knocked them off the plant and watched them drown. Screening of plants is one of those things that, yeah, we might be able to do it under certain circumstances. We know our melon growers and gardeners are using these kinds of screens called floating row covers to keep cucumber beetles from eating their muskmelon plants, keeping squash bugs off of squash plants and pumpkin plants. This is a real labor-intensive proposition to cover a huge row like this. But if you had a small number of plants and could figure out some way to put a screen around them, that certainly might work. Now, the third option was to use insecticides, but you're going to have to start controlling the adult stage early, and you're going to have to repeat it several times. There is no one and done for controlling the Japanese beetle. And that's because they appear over that long period of time, and we don't have any insecticides that will last the 6 to 8 weeks that you need protection, especially if it gets to be a rainy year. So you're going to need repeated applications in order to keep the green leaves on the plants. If that's your goal, if that's your requirement that your plant have those green leaves. We know beans can take a lot of defoliation, up to 30% defoliation without suppressing the yield. So sometimes tolerating would be possible, but if you really had to keep those plants green, say you were a nursery selling plants, you would have to use insecticides on over a repeated course of applications. Mostly we're going to use contact insecticides, especially in food crops, but even on ornamentals, systemic insecticides are not the answer they used to be, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. We do have products that you can put on the plant to act as a repellent. That is, the beetles aren't killed, they're just repelled away, and we'll talk about some biological controls when we get there. Almost every insecticide in the garden center is labeled for Japanese beetles. That's because there's a huge market for Japanese beetle insecticides. And the manufacturers have figured it out that they can sell a product if they put the word Japanese beetle on it. And so almost everything you can buy is going to work. Now, pyrethroids like deltamethrin, cyfluthrin, and bifenthrin are going to be both knockdown and residual, and are good choices if you're willing to use a synthetic insecticide. Carbaryl, the insecticide 7, has been around for over 50 years, and it's still a good choice for controlling this particular pest, but it has a terrible reputation because of its toxicity to pollinators. So we would never apply these insecticides to anything that's in bloom, nor near anything that's in bloom where pollinators, honeybees, and others might be visiting. So there is a downside to using those, but if used with care, it can be done. Azadirachtin and kale and clay are repellents. Azadirachtin is sold under the trade name Neem, N-E-E-M, and this is a popular insecticide that has lots of uses, but it only repels the adult beetles, it doesn't kill them. So you could chase them off of one plant and they would just go somewhere and feed on something else if you use that. Kaolin clay is a mineral that you mix with water and you shake your sprayer constantly to keep it in suspension. And it's like you're applying a layer of dust over the entire plant, which then deters the beetles from feeding. There are a couple of biological insecticides that we'll talk about. Piola is just really short term. It only kills on contact. And we'll talk about this product called Beetle Gone in just a little bit. So it's not hard to find an insecticide that will kill Japanese beetles. The thing is, can you do it thoroughly enough? Can you do it often enough to achieve your goal of having perfect plants? Okay. I mentioned systemic insecticides are no longer the answer, and that's partially because of their effect on pollinators. The neonicotinoid imidacloprid, sold under the trade name Merit, and a few others like Bayer Advanced Tree and Shrub Insect Control, was a popular choice for linden trees because you put it on the ground in June, it went into the roots, up through the trunk, out into the leaves, and as the Japanese beetles ate, they died. Well, that product is no longer legal for use on lindens or any of the related trees because it turns out the insecticide that was in the leaves killing the Japanese beetle adults was also in the nectar harming pollinators. So that, be very careful about that in terms of what you can and cannot use. And we're always conscious of what we can do to preserve the pollinators. So keep that in mind. I mentioned this new biological control name called Beetle Gone. Beetle Gone TLC is a registered trade name from one company. The active ingredient in this is a bacterium. The bacterium is called Bacillus thuringiensis galleria. And you know the word Bacillus thuringiensis, we just call that BT. And you've been putting that on your broccoli to control caterpillars for a long time. We've been kind of sloppy in the past. You haven't been using just any old BT for caterpillar control on your broccoli and cabbages. You've been using BT Kerstaki, BTK. And it turns out there are dozens of strains of Bacillus thuringiensis that are being discovered and finding that they have very specific action. Another one that you may use if you have mosquitoes developing in your pond, you can buy these little donuts or briquettes. You throw that out into the water. As it dissolves, it releases a bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, just like the country Israel, israelensis. And that BTI only kills fly larvae. BTK only kills caterpillars. BTG, Bacillus thuringiensis galleria, kills Japanese beetles. Convenient. And it works in the adult stage. And this is different than what we usually talk about. We usually talk about BT products being effective against larvae. In this case, it's both the larvae and the adults. That's the good news. We have a biological control for Japanese beetle adults that you could spray on your roses, your ornamental trees and shrubs, your vegetables to kill the Japanese beetle adults as they're feeding. Now the bad news. It takes 1/4 pound to 1.5 pounds per gallon of water in the finished spray that you apply. You can buy a whole 5-pound bag for $184, which calculates out to be $37 per gallon of spray. Your green beans better be worth a lot of money to you if you're going to apply that much, a spray that costs that much money to that crop. Yes, it's available. Yes, it's organic. Yes, it's non-toxic to you and mammals and other wildlife. There is a problem. It may be toxic to other beneficials, and especially butterflies and some others, but we're other beetles and so forth. But the cost is really, should really slow you down and make you think about using that. Now, the same product, BTG, is sold by Gardens Alive, a web-based garden supply, under the trade name Beetlejuice. And that's also a registered trademark, where you can buy 32 ounces for $32 for an 8-ounce container. Their directions, that label I've printed there, says 4 to 12 dry ounces per gallon of water. Well, let's take the middle and say it's 8 ounces that we're going to apply in a gallon of water. That's $32 for a gallon of spray. And if you had to do that several times in the course of the Japanese beetle emergence, you've racked up a lot of money in control. So there is an option available if you can afford it. Well, it turns out it works. This is one of those things that your first reaction would be, oh, I'm going to be skeptical till I hear about it. But Stanton Gill at the University of Maryland, who's done a lot of Japanese beetle research on the East Coast, said it worked. It worked until it rained, and then it had to be reapplied. So that cost, you may be applying it several times. University of California, Davis has also been testing this, which is interesting since California thinks they do not have Japanese beetle. They found that there was some threat to pollinators and others, and put this statement in their literature: do not apply or allow to drift to plants that are flowering. So when we've said do not spray plants in bloom, it applies to this one as well. Then Gardens Alive, in their sale of beetle juice, says do not apply within 300 feet of any habitats of threatened or endangered moths, butterflies, or beetles. You know, that's the endangered threatened species from the Fish and Wildlife Service. But you know, when you're giving that when you're given that kind of a direction, you have to stop and think, okay, maybe it's not as selective as what we originally thought. But it is an option that's out there for you. Every store that has the word Japanese beetle in their marketing will try to sell you a trap. And I'll tell you, save your money, donate it to a worthy cause instead. Putting out a Japanese beetle trap when you don't have Japanese beetles is a recipe for failure because you're attracting them in. When you put out a trap during that exponential growth of the curve, you're only catching a small portion of the population that's out there. So it's like bailing the ocean with a bucket. Yes, you can use a trap and catch hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of beetles, and seeing 10,000 dead Japanese beetles rotting and smelling in the bottom of a bucket may make you feel pretty good. It did not change the environment one bit. You still have lots of Japanese beetles out there. So trapping is not recommended. If you are going to use a trap, make sure you put it away from what you're trying to protect so that they'll at least be lured away from the crop. But trapping is not a recommended option, but everybody sells Japanese beetle traps and everybody says they work. Look, I caught 10,000 beetles. Big deal. There are 10 million beetles in your county. You didn't change the population one bit. Well, let's talk just briefly about white grub damage. This is the larval stage of the Japanese beetle, and they are down in the ground where they eat the roots right under the soil, right under the grass at the soil surface, causing these irregular dead spots. How do you know that's Japanese beetles and not drought? Because when you go out, that grass, what's left of that grass pulls loose from the soil because there are no roots. The roots have been eaten off. So it rolls up like cheap carpet. And there's when you roll it back at the right time of the year, you'll see those grubs at the soil surface. Not a problem identifying that it was grub damage when it's too late to do anything about it. That's the problem. If your grass looks like that top picture, it's already dead, and you've got to you'll have to re-establish the grass. Oftentimes we don't know we have white grubs in our lawns, but the skunks and the raccoons do. The foxes, wild pigs, armadillos, and everybody else will come out and rototill the grass to get to the white grubs that are underneath. Now you can repair that by putting those pieces of sod back down, but the next night the raccoons will come back and they'll tear it up again. So secondary damage is frequently how we know we have white grub problems. When we talk about white grub treatment, there are insecticides that last for months in the soil. And these can be put down May, June, July, anytime before the beginning of August, before the middle of August. And those insecticides will control the little tiny white grub larvae as they're hatching from the egg. That's why they have to be put down before August. If it's already August and into September when you find you have white grubs, there are different insecticides that you can use for cure. If it's October and you're discovering white grubs for the first time, it's too late for insecticides to work. So reinvigorate the lawn however you can by watering, seeding, or fertilizing. So we've got these two treatment options if you're going to control white grubs. Now, to tie this to what we were just talking about, though, controlling white grubs in your lawn will not protect your ornamentals, your vegetables, or your fruits the following year. There's this oversimplified notion that if I kill the grubs in this little piece of earth over which I have control, I will be out of the Japanese beetle business. And that's not true at all. Japanese beetles fly in from the neighbors. They fly in from the next county. They are very mobile and they fly very well. They're very adept flyers, and they will find your linden tree no matter how many grubs you kill in your lawn. Now, we proved this on golf courses where there's 100 acres of turf grass with no white grubs because they use insecticides because the golfers demand it. There are no white grubs on the golf course, but their linden trees are still defoliated because in the middle of 100 acres of golf course, the Japanese beetles are flying in and finding those trees. So killing grubs does not protect your ornamentals. White grub control, again, happens in that period of May through the end of September with those two different strategies. One group of chemicals to prevent damage, another group of chemicals to cure the grubs after they're already present. And the insecticides must reach the soil, which means you don't spray the grass and leave it there. You have to spray the grass, turn on the irrigation, and give half an inch of irrigation to move the insecticide down into the soil if you're going to try to control the grubs. Some last comments about available biological controls. Milky spore disease has been around for a long, long time, been around longer than I have. It was formerly called Bacillus papilii. It's a bacterium that gets into Japanese beetles and kills the larvae, gets into the beetles while they're in the ground. Its name was changed. It's now Bacillus papilii, sold under the trade name either milky spore or doom. And if you believe the internet, everybody says this is the miracle that solved my problem. I don't believe it. Going back to the 1940s, the US Department of Agriculture was experimenting with milky spore disease with Bacillus papilii. It did not work. It still does not work, and especially here in the upper Midwest. Now, if you lived in the South, Florida, Louisiana, Alabama, so forth, where the soils are moist and constantly warm, you have a better chance. But Iowa soils and Nebraska soils alternate between drought, frozen, flooded, and those bacterial spores don't have a chance. And this is just one of those that when you read on the internet something that sounds too good to believe, too good to be true, it's probably not true. So we don't recommend milky spore disease. We say try it. If you do, please treat only half of your lawn and tell us how many grubs you have in the treated half compared to the untreated half, and then we'll have a valid comparison. The last biological control is the same ingredient we just talked about, Bacillus thuringiensis galleria, which is sold under the name Grub Gone. This is a granular insecticide that is applied just like the other insecticides as a grub prevention, watered in, and in Michigan State University tests, they receive 50 to 75% reduction of the Japanese beetle larvae. But not every batch worked the same. And remember, with these biological controls, you're dealing with a living bacterium that's producing a toxin and producing spores that have to be alive and effective in the can, in the sprayer, in the granule, in the ground. And that's an awful lot to ask for a product that it has to work over a longer period of time. So Grub Gone is available, and is another insecticide that could be used. It's applied at the same time when the adults are flying, just before the eggs are laid. It calls for 2.3 to 3.4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. You go online to buy the stuff. You get 100 to 150, you get 10 pounds for $65 from a website called growitnaturally.com. They claim that's enough to treat 5,000 square feet. When I did the calculations based on the label, it's actually only 3,000 to 4,000 square feet that you would treat for $65. That's not a whole lot more than buying a traditional synthetic insecticide and using it for grub control in the home lawn. But these options are out there if you're interested. That sums up Japanese beetle. We'll take questions about Japanese beetle as they come in. I'll leave my name and phone number up here for a little bit. Actually, it's much more useful to you if you get my email address, except on Monday nights when I come in to do webinars with master gardeners. I'm working from home, so the phone rings off the wall here in the office and there's nobody here to answer it. So write down the email address, drlewis@iastate.edu, and be glad to respond to you that way until we're all back together and can meet in person. I hope that happens again someday, or we can at least talk on the telephone. So let me stop sharing that screen and we'll go to our questions and see what's come in. If there's something burning, we'll take that first. But I promised I would talk about wasps. Paper wasps have been super abundant this spring. I think it's a couple of things. One, it was a fairly mild winter, and I think the wasps that had to overwinter in the adult stage were very successful at it. We've had not a lot of heavy rain so far this year, and I think that's been a benefit to the wasps. And right now, mostly what you're seeing are new queens who are looking to start a colony. So there they are flying around your shutters on your house. They're flying up under the eaves of your house. They're traveling around. They're looking for a place to build a nest. And then they make that nest. It's an open comb that hangs upside down under the eaves or in the recessed light fixtures, whatever's out there to provide them protection, in under the porch. Until they build a nest, there's not much you can do about it. A badminton racket or a tennis racket to ping them out of the air might work, but we really don't have any way to kill them up in the air when they're just sort of flying around. When they land, you might be able to hit them with one of those wasp and hornet aerosol sprays, but when they start making a nest, control will be very easy to do. Now, in the meantime, what's the harm? You're talking about a beneficial predator that will eat the caterpillars off of your broccoli all summer. And here you are trying to kill it in the springtime? You know, live and let live. They're not a high threat until there's a population in a highly trafficked area. So it's one of those things we could live with if you would just, at this time of the year, you could live with them and not have to kill every one of them. My town is seeing a shortage of wasp and hornet aerosol sprays. Those are the ones that shoot 15 to 20 feet. Very good for controlling nests up under the eaves of the house, on the porch and so forth. If you are going to treat nests, I recommend you do it at night. Asian giant hornet. Wow, what a media explosion we've had on that. There's a sensationalized name that I vowed this morning I would never say. The name of the wasp is Asian giant hornet. The name that it was given in the media and by some beekeepers who are pushing the media to get this story out just doesn't do it any favors. It's bad enough as it is. We don't need to over sensationalize by giving it a new made up name. So Asian giant hornet is from Japan. It is a very large hornet, 2 inches long. When it stings, it injects a large dose of venom, so it hurts. There's a pain rating for stinging insects. The honeybee was rated as a 3. On a scale of 1 to 5, honeybees hurt like a 3. This one hurts like a 5+, similar to the bullet ants of South America. And it also, if it gets a chance to invade honeybee colonies, honeybee hives, the Asian giant hornet will kill honeybees. Now, honeybees have a way of protecting themselves, but the fact that it kills honeybees has put beekeepers on high alert that we need to spread the word that this is going to be the end of civilization as we know it. If we survive COVID-19, we will not survive Asian giant hornet if you believe the news media. So yes, it's bad. Yes, it's been found in 2 places, Washington and British Columbia, with no evidence that it is anywhere else in the United States. So watch for our news release, and you've got my address. If you see anything that looks like a suspiciously large wasp, go ahead and send me a picture, and we'll be able to put your mind at ease by making an identification of the digital image. There are other large wasps and bees. The other big one is the cicada killer wasp, which is about 1.5 inches that burrows in the ground in July. So it would not be here now, but in July, when people are still talking about this, that will be the one that we'll see, and people will get all excited. So our job as master gardeners and as university employees is calm the public. It's not the end of the world. Send us what is of concern to you, and we'll help you identify it. We're not going to diagnose it on your say-so. We need evidence of what you're saying is true, and that can be a digital image. So let us help you by doing the diagnosis, and that's always the first step of integrated pest management. All right, what else would they like to know, Carol?
Donald, we had a question from Catherine. She says, we moved to a new house in the fall. The prior owner had sprayed the junipers for bagworms in August. I picked off as many of them as I could find in early April. Since the shrubs were sprayed, should I be concerned that any remaining bags are viable?
Bagworm is an interesting problem, and you folks are far enough south that you see it most of the time. We get to see it like once every 10 years up here in Ames. But bagworm is a caterpillar that feeds from June to August. And as it feeds, it makes these bags that it carries around. Each caterpillar makes its own little bag. So there are these little conical sacs made out of silk and plant bits that grow to about 1.5 inches in length, and the caterpillar is in there. They can kill spruce trees and junipers and arborvitaes by their defoliation. When they're on deciduous trees, it's just another annoyance. It's not fatal, but they can kill the conifer trees. Now, August was probably too late to do any good. If the bags are sealed shut and tied to the twigs, your spray is doing nothing. Absolutely, probably worse than nothing. You killed biological controls without controlling the pest. So they may have been a little late. Picking them off by hand, great. That's a good mechanical control. Now you need to go back out in June, in the middle of June, go out and stare at those trees. Because what you're looking for are bagworms that are 1/4 inch long. Okay, remember first instar, second instar, how they insect caterpillars grow by molting. The first instar, the bag is only 1/4 inch long. They're made out of plant bits, so they camouflage very well. And I say stare at the tree because you stare at it and you'll see them wiggling, okay? And when you just glance at the tree, you don't see anything because of the camouflage. So look in June and spray Bacillus thuringiensis kerstaki, BTK, spray dipel in the end of June while the caterpillars are still small for best control.
All right. We have another question from Vera who says, my birch tree had Japanese beetle defoliate it. Is there a type of birch that is not susceptible?
I don't think so. I've seen them on river birch, but the white birch really seemed to attract a lot of attention. I don't suppose you have many white birch left as far south as you are anyway. No, I don't think there's a birch that's going to be resistant to them. Now on our website, the Horticulture and Home Pest News, there's a list of trees that are highly attractive and less attractive. I don't think there are any that are unattractive to Japanese beetles. Oh wait, there is one. The tree that is least bothered by the Japanese beetle is ash. So, you know, you don't have any ash trees left, but if you did, the Japanese beetles wouldn't be eating them. What an irony that is. So we'll see if we can get that list up and look at that. But if you go to our Horticulture and Home Pest News website and look up Japanese beetle, there's a list of plants that are most susceptible and least susceptible. Least susceptible does not mean immune. And my recollection is all the birch trees are going to be susceptible, as are all the elms, including the really fancy ones that people planted over the last several years.
All right, so if anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to type them in the question and answer box. I'll give you just another minute. And it can be over any insect topic, inside, outside. we deal with them all.
We'll even take bed bug questions. That's the kind of people we are.
That's all right. Well, I'm not getting any further questions, Donald. So thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Donald, for being willing to jump in. Oh, we do have a question. So what is the best way to deal with stink bugs?
I assume they mean brown marmorated stink bug, the one that's the household accidental invader. I suspect you could do what I do. I found now I'm up to 12. I can no longer count them on my hands. I have to have my fingers and my toes. I've had 12 in my house, and I have never found more than one at a time. All 12 of them have been preserved as scientific specimens with a pin stuck through them and a little label on the bottom. So you could keep them. They make good specimens, good conversation pieces. Otherwise, just pick them up and throw them back outside. The brown marmorated stink bug in Iowa is a very minor nuisance compared to what it is in Europe and in the eastern United States, Pennsylvania, New York, where they sweep them up by the tens of thousands off their front porch, or they sweep them up, they vacuum them up by the dozens inside their house. I've never talked to anybody who could actually say they have more than a few. So once they're inside, the control for brown marmorated stink bugs, multicolored Asian lady beetles, attic flies, box elder bugs, it's all the same. Vacuum them up, sweep them up, and discard after they're inside the house. The final answer to that is, how did they get in? They found a crack or a gap somewhere. Is there someplace you could winterize, do better weather stripping, better caulking? We might be able to prevent them getting in, but we have such low populations that right now, spraying the outside of your house for brown marmorated stink bugs in September would not be advised. Now, if you had box elder bug outbreaks at the same time, you might spray for that on the outside. But once those invaders are in, picking them up, mechanical control is the best thing to do.
All right. And now we have another couple of questions. So
we waited.
Christine asked, we've had our ash trees treated every other year for EAB. Can this be done indefinitely?
You know, we don't know. Emerald ash borer is never going to go away. And so as long as that ash tree is there, there is a risk. But what we're finding is when all the ash trees in a neighborhood die, the population of emerald ash borers decreases as well. It doesn't go to zero though. It's still there, it's still low. So your tree is at lower risk than it was. So there's a period maybe 10 years down the road where we will say, okay, let's back off and do every third year. Let's back off and do every fourth year. But right now, if that's a high value tree that must be protected, our best recommendation is to go ahead and treat every other year. It's not always going to be like that, but right now, that's our best answer for controlling emerald ash borer in high value trees.
All right. Catherine wants to know, in a veggie raised bed, we saw many very small ants on the wood. Should we be concerned about them?
Ants are beneficial. Let's start with the good news. Ants are nature's aerators. They're aerating the soil. They're organic matter fixers. They're moving organic matter into the ground. They're increasing aeration and water infiltration. They are doing good things for the soil. And depending on the species, some ants are predators, like the carpenter ants, the big black ants. They're predators that eat other insects. So those are good things. Some of the field ants, the other big black ants that make the mounds in the yard, eat Japanese beetle eggs. Wow, good for them. They're controlling the Japanese beetles and we aren't paying them to do it. So lots of good things we could say about ants. Ants in the soil do not eat your plants, but every once in a while, ants will make a mound too close to the roots of your plant. And the plant will dry out because of root disruption, not because of feeding damage. So that's what you have to watch out for, is that the anthills aren't right there. Now, if the ants are in the wood of your raised bed, that's a whole nother problem, and you probably need to control the carpenter ants that are chewing up the wood and spitting out the sawdust. But if the ants are nesting in the soil, walking by. I wouldn't worry with them, worry about them, live and let live, and just make sure they don't build mounds around the roots of your valuable plants.
All right. Earl Hallbergs asked, has the scarlet lily leaf beetle arrived here yet?
You know, I knew Earl was going to be in this audience, and that's always scary when an entomologist is talking to a better entomologist. As far as I know, Earl, we have not documented the scarlet leaf beetle, but that's one that, the lily leaf beetle, that's one that isn't attracting a lot of attention. I mean, Japanese beetle people notice, and emerald ash borer people notice their dead ash trees. I guess we don't have enough lily enthusiasts to pay a lot of attention, but thanks for the question. I think the answer is no, but now I have to check and confirm.
Perfect. And I'll leave it up for just another minute to see if we get another question or two. And Mary, thank you so much. Mary says, not a question, but thank you. Very interesting presentation and a great way to spend a rainy Monday night.
Our rain is over here. We're not getting, it might still be sprinkling, very light rain, if at all.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. So again, thank you for joining us all this spring through several different webinars. And Dr. Lewis, thank you for joining us on this rainy Monday night. We really appreciate that. So with that, thank you and have a great evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.